3, 2, 1.
Good evening. In her masterclass, she discusses the evolution of a radical methodology involving biomaterials, biofabrication, and biodesign, a thought process recognized as imperative for tackling climate change. She is investigating ways in which our buildings and our urban environments can perform biological systems such as photosynthesis. By designing at the intersection of architecture, biology, and engineering, her projects are constructed from a novel living material, a material that supports the growth of microorganisms on a nano scale, while allowing the fabrication of living, breathing systems on a macro scale. She challenges architecture to move one step beyond the adoption of geometric forms and simply look at nature, but instead, an architecture that performs like the systems in nature. Ladies and gentlemen, Forum Days presents today's master speaker, architect, and biodesigner Shneel Malik, discussing designing living systems for a sustainable future, joining us from UCL London. A TEDx speaker, Shneel will share with us the potential of interdisciplinary design thinking that lies at the heart of the Digital Arts Forum, the first design and art community that is leading the change for the next epoch as we find ourselves at the intersection of technology, art, science, sustainability, and design. The Digital Arts Forum covers all forms of digital design and art, from fashion design to virtual reality to biodesign. The idea is to generate collaborative knowledge and projects that span multiple disciplines catalyzed by this new thinking. We are all together for the second edition of Forum Days, which is the most happening weekday seminars for the creative community. Master speakers from across the world share insights on the cutting edge of design and technology, covering fashion, photography, sound, design, art, and architecture, and much more. There is a brief technology interlude, we call it fireside chat, followed by a free-flowing discussion and conversations. With this, I request Kunal to kindly run the introduction AV.
Right on the screen, just.
So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together as I present Shneel Malik to you. Over to you, Shneel.
Good evening, everyone. I'll just quickly share my screen and then, brilliant. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, firstly, for taking time out and joining us this afternoon. I hope everybody on the other side of my screen is safe and healthy and keeping optimistic. I would also like to thank and congratulate the Scotch Foundation for having taken this brilliant initiative with design and innovation. As Dr. Dhanjal very correctly introduced, we will be talking about designing living systems for a sustainable future. I come from a very traditional architecture background, but over the last 5 to 6 years, I've begun to work collaboratively with scientists, specifically biochemical engineers, biologists, and material scientists, to start questioning how our buildings can begin to perform like natural systems. And that's exactly what I will talk to you about today. We all know that in addition to the existing pandemic, there is an already looming pandemic of the climate change. And besides our consumerism and materialistic world, and the sort of comforts that we've managed to achieve for ourselves, architecture, or the built environment, is actually one of the biggest or substantial footprints that occupy the land, along with obviously the oceans and the soil, the atmosphere. And architecture and our cities have a lot of contribution to make if we are to tackle the current climate crisis. There are a lot of incredible innovations that are taking place in today's time, but one approach that I look at, along with everybody else at the Bio-Integrated Design Lab, is of biodesign or bioarchitecture. That can architecture begin to talk with biology and engineering in order to create biologically active systems? Can my wall do more than just exist? Can it begin to breathe like the tree bark, for instance? And I challenge a lot in my research that I don't necessarily want my buildings to just look like the plant leaf or look like a rose petal. For me, it's performance is what's important, right? And what you see on the screen right now is, for me, architecture is actually the forms and the functions that exist in nature. Biology, we delve ourselves. As an architect, I put on a lab coat and I step into the lab environment and conduct my own scientific experiments. And with engineers and this entire team of interdisciplinary designers that we call ourselves now, we try to find different methodologies. Now, obviously, the biggest question is that why. There are two big questions. Why now is the correct time to be doing this? And why did we not look at it before, right? So my very simple statement here is that, one, our disciplines have evolved over the years to gain immense amount of knowledge in their silos. And I think now is the time for us to begin exchanging knowledge. And two, because we needed all that knowledge in the sciences, in the design, in the engineering, in social anthropology, in economics, to begin having that conversation across borders. And that's why to now begin thinking that, is it just a brick that can make our building a wall, or our building, or can we start to innovate new materials that make those performances possible? I often use this very triangulated methodology, but it's very integrated, where we start looking at the material itself. Can we look at new materials that can perform natural systems? What are their relative fabrication techniques? How do we fabricate with that new material, and how can we make it big? How should this material look like? What is the design, right? And obviously, the fourth very important is the purpose. Why are we why are we even doing this in the first place? Is it just so that it's fancy and trendy and we think it can help us prevent climate change, or is it one step further? So the material I work with is a completely water-based material. It's a water-based hydrogel that allows a microorganism or algae to grow inside the material. Have you ever heard of a concrete, for instance? If you've seen, you might, in gardens, for instance, when you walk in monsoon seasons, you often see pavements and parapets that become much more greener. And often it's moss and algae, and they've sort of found their way of colonizing our buildings. We don't really like it because we think it's dirty. But imagine if we design a material that allows for those organisms specifically to grow. And what you see on the screen are just some initial tests that we have begun doing to understand the material property. I need to know and understand the material really well in order to begin designing with it, right? So when I first make this material, it's completely water-based, it's biodegradable. I put in certain micro algae cells, in it, just like mixing it. It's a very simple. It's like if you know how to bake, you can very easily make this material. It's made of completely food grade ingredients in my kitchen, literally. And over a period of time, this material begins to become greener, just like the skin of a plant leaf. Why? Because it's performing photosynthesis. The algae cells in the material are exchanging energy with its surroundings and becoming greener with time. Now, obviously, this is not a eureka moment for me. I'm not a scientist. I don't understand. I only now have begun slightly understanding some of these principles. But I, for the first time, got inspired by the medical field, where you see now organs being 3D printed. You see complete tissues and skins being fabricated in labs and then put into our bodies. So what they do is actually very interesting. They create something that's completely synthetic, but when they make it and put it inside my body, it becomes, and it begins to act like one, right? It adapts to my system. And that triggered something in me that, what if we do this? What if when I introduce a system like this, such as photosynthesis, in my environment synthetically, can it begin to perform like it's one with its surrounding environments? And obviously the materials that the people in biomedicine field use are very high tech, super expensive. But what I tried to do in my little kitchen was to order certain food grade materials and just begin playing around with them. And that's how I began to become more friendly with this material. The biggest constraint, besides all the high tech that biomedicine field does, is that their aim of fabricating this ear is just that. Okay, like they don't want a really big ear. But as an architect, I want everything to be big. I want these systems to be habitable. I want these systems to be on an architectural scale. And that's when I started to look at how nature constructs its materials. And I realized that they make it layer by layer. So the skin or the bark of a tree are all deposited over a series of layers. And as every layer is formed, the material properties are slightly tweaked so that it begins to become and behave like a tree bark. And that's exactly what I started to do. I started to print with this material layer by layer. And with every layer I printed, I started to change its properties. So for instance, if I want my base to be very strong, I made this material super strong. And if I wanted the top layer to perform photosynthesis, like you can see here, the topmost layer is very green because it has higher water percentage and it allows my algae to grow on it. So, and that's why the bottom layers are slightly light green. This is a photograph of how this panel looks like after 14 days of fabrication and after exchanging energy from its surroundings. And you can see the microalgae beginning to grow in this material. I'll show you a quick video of how we were fabricating this. So again, because in biomedicine, they do it in small, super expensive 3D printers. What I did, I took a robotic arm and I put 3 different materials in it and I started to print with them. This was for the first time ever, actually, that massive 1 meter large living panels were ever 3D printed with microalgae. What obviously it allows me also to do is change its geometry, control how big these panels can get, how high these panels can get. Again, this is another, this shows how deep down we can go in a resolution. So instead of just having one material, which is super strong and allowing me to scale up and make buildings, here is a material that allows me to go further down in resolution onto a micro scale. and start to build these living systems from bottom up. And I think that is very, very interesting. That's very empowering as well to find, to think that you're beginning to garden with these systems, right? We put a seed outside in my backyard and we start to water it, and then a plant grows out of it. It's a similar system here, that we are only printing or fabricating the stage one, and in order to initiate the biological process. Okay, but because it is a completely water-based material, right? It's like a gel. It's very gooey, and I still have structural constraints. And in order for me to do the next scale-up step, I started to tweak existing building materials and tried to amalgamate it with my new building material. So what you see here is a microporous concrete, which has been casted with the living material. So this concrete is now tailored to support my microalgal cells to grow. I very early on in the beginning of the conversation said that it's very important as an architect to consider what is the purpose of all this innovation? What is the purpose of all these high-tech solutions? And again, in nature, a plant just doesn't grow. It performs multiple systems together. So it isn't new for me to begin thinking that while my microalgae is growing in this material, can it also perform an additional application? And the science has been using microalgae for various purposes, such as cleaning polluted water and even generating small amounts of electricity. So I built actually it wasn't as small, it's a comparatively larger prototype where we managed to generate electricity from the material. So we 3D printed the scaffold or the structure first. Then we connected the anode and the cathodes in order to create a series of cells. And we layered the living material on it. And we were able to power a digital clock. Again, this is a very, very initial prototype it was a demonstration, right, of what we can do. Again, there's a quick short video before we move on to the next. Right. So now I've got a new material. It allows an organism, a microorganism, to grow in it by performing photosynthesis. I'm beginning to understand the properties of the material, and I'm beginning to design and control it, right? But I'm still an architect in my heart. My mother constantly kept asking me, darling, didn't you study architecture? Where did this microalgae come from? Who do you think is going to use this? And there were all these questions that were constantly looming, which are very relevant questions. And I'm sure everybody on the other side of the screen might be asking the same things. But before I start, I want to take you briefly to Kolkata. As part of a grant proposal we won at UCL, I got an opportunity as an architect to visit small-scale artisan industries in Kolkata. And I went as part of a team of 3 women. It was me, who was an architect, I was accompanied with Dr. Brenda Parker, who's a biochemical engineer, and Laura Stoffels, who's a biologist, right? So imagine 3 women from completely different backgrounds unleashed into a completely different world. What are we supposed to do? We went into the fields to understand their manufacturing process. We went into the fields to question their rural settings. We went into the fields to understand where do they get their water supply from, what do they do after they've used it. So what you see here is it's a bangle maker who's electroplating bangles in a bucket of water. This water contains heavy metals, which contain nickel, arsenic, cadmium, manganese, iron in high quantities, which in turn create a lot of unhealthy living conditions, and obviously, will have a lot of diseases being in direct contact with this water. And when I ask these people what do they do after they've used this water, they say either they tip it in a sand pit that is dug in their backyard, or they put it back into the same stream from where they first collected the water. So they're getting freshwater supply from the river, and then a few kilometers away, they go and throw this colored water, which is then diluted, well, not really diluted, but gets accumulated with other artisan industries and goes into the main rivers. It triggered in us that this is where the problem is, right? This is where the design opportunity lies. What if we're able to create a solution where these people, where the small scale artisans are empowered to clean their own polluted water on their side and reuse it? Obviously, after we visited some of these, we collected samples and we went back into our labs to test the material, which I have been talking about, the hydrogel with the microalgae and its ability to absorb heavy metals from all this colored water. Luckily, our scientific experiments showed that microalgae is able to absorb heavy metals that are in polluted water, leaving behind comparatively cleaner water. Now, the next question as an architect, they asked me as a designer, how do you make this material available to them? They don't have any economic facility. It's a biomaterial, a completely new material nobody has access to. How do you imagine this to be? So I designed tiles, and these tiles are laid with the living material. And you can tessellate these tiles into a wall as big or as small, depending on the space available. These tiles are designed to be fabricated by the local artisans themselves. This is a render of the wall being installed in a small textile dyeing courtyard in Jaipur. On the right, you can see we've also shown another wall that is coming up. I don't know if you can identify that. So obviously, once we did a very initial concept sketch for an international competition, which we luckily won, hosted by BMW in New York. And our very first exhibition was done by these artisans, actually. I was traveling home and I went and worked with these artisan workers in the field. And we prepared these tiles with them. We laid the hydrogel with the algae with them, and they were shipped off to New York for their first exhibition. What is really important for me is that we are empowering local artisans and actually the most culturally rich communities to be able to treat their own polluted water while they're still uplifting their infrastructure in a very, by using a high-tech solution in a rather low-tech manner. The user is required to simply pour the polluted water into the inlets present at the top of the wall. The water then enters the system running onto the branch channels, allowing the microalgae to absorb the heavy metals present in the polluted water. This clean water can either be reused in their manufacturing process, or now they can safely dispose it into either the surface groundwater recharge or back into the same river from where they had collected it. Our very next step is to do a pilot scale study. We've identified small scale industries in Panipat, in Kolkata, and in Jaipur, where we are working with the artisans to not just educate them of how they can develop the system, but also how they can maintain it. When would the microalgae need to be replaced? Our lab tests have shown microalgae to reduce the concentration of cadmium by 10 folds within 30 to 45 minutes, water which is fit to be reused by them. We also did a scaled up, a very first scale up prototype at the London Design Festival last September, where we demonstrated the entire working principle. So the tiles can be fabricated using laterite, clay, or anything that's locally available. The material is very easy to make. You can simply mix it and then apply it on the walls. Like the cartridges in our water filters, the microalgae will need to be replaced from time to time, and that's what will become relevant when we go and do the site experiment, the pilot test. Now the next question, what happens with the heavy metal that is now trapped in this material? We've recognized that this heavy metal can be extracted from the material and brought back into the system to create other valuable products, such as batteries. And in an ideal scenario, we envision the circular economy loop where the industries incentivize the small villagers in order to continue to maintain and collect the heavy metal water. It's estimated that about 41% of the polluted water across the globe comes from the millions of small-scale industries such as these. And a large percentage of these industries have no facility to treat their polluted water, and are obviously like the mission that we're headed towards is to move that needle on that 41%. I hope I'm nearly done. Just to quickly conclude, I want to just maybe pinpoint 2 key points here, which I think are takeaways. Is one, working with nature in collaboration with it, we realize the united or the holistic outlook that we can get, right? If we allow certain species to actively grow, they not just create a more abundant environment for us, but also practically clean polluted water, remediate soil, rewild the environment. And I think that's a very, very, that's the aim that we're designing for as biodesigners. And the second would be collaboration. None of this would have happened if, the people that have been involved in all the projects that I've shown here. And I think that is in essence, that's at the heart of what Digital Arts Forum is trying to do, is to give you a platform where you can actually collaborate with people from different fields and ask different questions, and to identify certain opportunities that allow you to progress and find new solutions for. So that's from me. Feel free to ask me questions. And back to Dr. Dhanjal. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. It was so informative. I got so engrossed, I never realized that, we are going and with the flow of your presentation. I'm sure, after we have gone through what you said and our next speaker, already I'm flooded with questions and queries. And also at the same time, people are getting very, very anxious to know a few things, which I'm sure, as you rightly said, from the collaboration which this platform exactly is meant for, it's going to lead to. So let me, in the meanwhile, move over to Mr. Wilton Suresh Pangoria. He's the category manager, mobile workstation, virtual reality, data science, strategic growth initiatives at HP. He's quite an old hat at the industry and has been an evangelist role on how to leverage technology to help increase output, convert creative ideas into reality, translate them better with the help of digital tools. He believes that technology is an enabler for creative professionals and can help them to enhance their creativity and take this to places. Technologies like mobile workstation and VR complement their creative workflows. He would be speaking on technology as an enabler for creative pros. Over to you, Wilton.
So there is a lot of synergy what we are doing in our labs and what we are talking today in today's presentation. So Andy Close, who is our HP president and CEO, he said the most successful companies of tomorrow will be those that not only pushes the boundaries of innovation, but the ones that also unlock the shared aspirations for brighter future. Now, having said that, if we go on some statistical data, so 88% of millennials, talks about, or they wanted to work for companies who, who contribute to the social cause and ethical causes. And in fact, 800 plus investment houses look for CDP ranking of the companies. So within HP labs, not only we try for latest and the brightest and the more innovative ideas, but at the same time there are a lot of work which is going on to sustainable products and to sustain the ecology. Now, having said that, a couple of first what we as a HP, we as this responsible company has brought to the to the consumers or the users of the product. So, for example, the complete portfolio what we have in workstation is 100%. It EPEAT Gold certified. Now we are talking about using a lot of recyclable materials. So there is a lot of ocean-bound plastic which is available. So 25 to 40% of product which we are selling in today's environment has got ocean-bound plastics used as a recyclable material. We are also emphasizing a lot of in terms of supply chain. We are doing a lot of innovation in terms of supply chain management. So we are focusing on bulk management. If any company goes for multiple number of units, so we insist on bulk packaging. All the product what we offer right now in Indian environment and worldwide is energy certified. At the same time, we are the first ones to use plastic-free packaging like molded pulps. So having said that, there is a lot of synergy, there is a lot of ecologies which we are working right now within our labs. Now coming from a perspective of enabler, so definitely when we say we, the creative minds and the technical minds, so this technology is definitely an enabler for any creative person. Without technology, so it complements your workflows, whether you are a SketchUp artist or you are a designer or architect. VR is the thing which is going to take place or has already embedded into the workflows. So this is technology wherein we come in with a first of its own kind, not from a technology perspective, but as a sustainable technology. So if you have a workflow which requires sketching, which requires your architectural dimensions, taking to the customer end, making customer, talking about your arts and initiatives, right? Technology is the one which takes you to the places.
Excellent. So, looks like we have absolutely a bright future in front of us when this new concept gets married with technology. And I'm sure as
absolutely,
fingers crossed for that. So, before I drown myself in the sea of questions, there are just piling up one after another. Let me quickly bring in Dr. Michael for his quick reactions on this new concept, which is what Shneel has just talked about.
All right, Shneel, that was fascinating, and I'm really happy to see the applications there, because one of the things you might agree I learned in design school very early is that it's possible to solve a problem, but a good idea solves multiple problems simultaneously. So I think you've opened up some interesting overlaps between issues of water scarcity and water security, the potential to revive or sustain indigenous and local craft traditions, working through material culture, and you can imagine types of informal prototyping, as well as concerns with the wider environment and testing out best practices. And we know that low tech is more affordable than high tech, and no tech is the most affordable. So I guess if I had a question, it would be about, are there other things that you can converge into some of these practices? Are there other arenas of performance that might be implied or implicit that in, say, next 5 years of your research, you tried to draw into it as well?
Firstly, I think the way you've concised everything and all the intentions with the project, I think you would have done a better presentation than me. But I think this is definitely a very, very beginning in a series of iterations, but also my biggest learning from having done all this, and also the very next immediate steps as we plan for them, is that how important it is to find the right opportunity to design for. Sometimes we often overlook things. And now there's another very interesting segment that we are maybe looking at is air pollution. And there are lichens and moss and symbiosis of certain microorganisms that we are looking at developing onto living walls that live by themselves rather than having a very expensive irrigation system as a maintenance. So there is that element as well. But then there's another element of the rapidly, the infrastructure that exists but is rapidly becoming redundant in its use with more digitization. And public infrastructure is a very, very crucial opportunity where infrastructure exists, maybe its use has become reduced, and how we can try to bank upon that as an opportunity. Yeah. And I don't know if you've noticed, there are, I think the Delhi government had recently funded a startup called Vayu, which means air, and they're industrial air pollution extractors, which are now lined on the most heavy traffic commuting regions in central Delhi. Again, that's an engineering solution. If you ask a designer, I would have maybe done it slightly differently. But I think those are conversations that will trigger when we go into the field and also understand what is the entire working model and how can we actually have more people work creatively to, so that they learn, they earn, and then they in turn give back to the environment. And I think it's very you can see it stimulates my head hugely, and you're constantly pecking for different ideas and opportunities outside. So that's a very, very interesting, and maybe we have a conversation about that later. Thank you so much.
That was good. In fact, from all around, I'm receiving a lot of compliments alongside the questions. Somebody says brilliant, somebody says phenomenal.
That's
somebody
really kind.
Never heard of a concept like this. I have a question. I'm actually, go to the extent of, putting 3-4 questions together. Given the interest of time, I'm sure we are going to overshoot by 5-7 minutes. So I hope it's fine with everyone. The first question comes from Astha. She's asking, what are the pros and cons of this material as far as application is concerned, when related to the Indian context, where there is a variety of climate zones? Another person in that same way asked, where in Kolkata you cited that example from?
Yeah.
Karthik is asking that, how is this be scaled in terms of function and functionality, more than one function, which is purification, electricity generation, so on and so forth. And there is one more from Anjali. She's asking that what's the property in microorganism which can purify water? So three different.
Great. Okay, very good question. I think in Kolkata, the place we visited is Domjur. It's a bangle makers it's a bangle making community, Domjur, Kolkata. Very good question. I think Anjali asked about the pros and cons of the material, especially with the very climates of the country. I think this is what I think biodesign helps me give an answer to this question, because we know certain species grow in certain climates. Certain trees grow in certain climates. So it would be that when we start doing the next phase of research and development, we will create a taxonomy of this material depending on where it is going to be applied, what are its local environmental conditions, what is the contamination in the polluted water, and also its relative tile pattern design. So imagine that this becomes a taxonomy or a language of its own, just like the multiple species of plants and animals that are in our surroundings. And I think that excites me even more, because in that case, every community will have its own unique pattern of wall. Am I hanging, or is it all right? Is my network okay?
It's all right. Please go ahead. Pretty much audible.
Okay, sorry. I just thought everything hanged. Okay. So I think that excites me even more, because in that case, every community will have its own unique wall design. So it becomes a brand for the community. So imagine that you're walking through Domjur, Kolkata, and you know that there are bangle makers, and you know what's the tradition, what's the local environmental conditions, and they have one pattern wall that is cleaning the polluted water. And the same principle is being used in Haryana, where there are different environmental conditions. So that's definitely, again, biodesign. I honestly don't even want to produce one product that is mass consumed globally. I think we've learned a lot from our existing scenario and tailoring certain properties. The computational design, I think Mr. Wilton identified that computational design allows us to create those parameters. So computationally, you can have a set of mathematical principles that then generates a series of these patterns and the material properties. And there was another question of what is the limitations and how can we use it beyond water pollution, right? The limitations are that it's completely water-based, so it's like a gel. So while as much as I've managed to make it structurally stable, there's still a lot of research to be done on that. This material dries out if not watered regularly and if not prepared properly. Again, because it's water-based, evaporation takes place under normal conditions. So that's why tailoring this. So the exhibition we did in London Design Festival was tailored for the London weather, which is very unpredictable, I will say. And over the course of 10 days of installation, we saw everything from rain to sun on the wall. And I think I was practically living besides it. And in terms of applications, yes, we are also looking at using this material and the microalgae for small amounts of, just using it for growing microalgae. So that you can extract biomass, which is then used as fertilizers for agriculture. And, so that the scientists would know much more about this, but from whatever my lit, they're definitely, okay, I'll give it back. I'll stop talking.
No, in fact, you also asked a couple of questions which related with the, what kind of a water-based material is that? What about its strength, structural strength and characteristics? You already answered that. So this was asked by Anisha Dev. In addition, there is another question which says that can we use it in all kind of construction activities, or there is a limited use?
It's not a building material yet. If you do want to use it in, I think there is a concept called biohybrid, where we merge the living with the non-living. And I think that's when I showed 2 small prototypes where we were beginning to merge this living material with existing building materials. And again, there is research being done on designing structurally stable biohybrids, which is obviously probably a different lecture altogether, but there is a possibility, but you can't use this material as a building material. No, please don't.
There is one question for Wilton here. Debarshi Barua is asking about the digital signatures latest research challenges and problems. And when it's married to a concept like this, where does technology fit in?
So it's an interesting question. So I would say companies has to be responsible enough, to talk about the sustainability. And I'm sure a majority of the companies who are into IT field, so at the time we are, inventing or reinventing a lot of things, there are a lot of innovation which is going on. And the environment where we live, it's absolutely dynamic and it's changing on a quarterly basis. And we push the boundaries for a reinvention and invention. So the companies has to be a little bit or rather more responsible in terms of what kind of IT waste they'll be generating in future. So they'll be more responsive in terms of recycling those material or using already recyclable material like we are using ocean bound plastic. So we have to develop the ecologies, we have to develop the ecosystem, right? Because majority of the waste, whether it is a cell phone waste or whether it is a computer waste, those gets into the landfills and it's absolutely not usable. So there are a lot of inventions are required and responsibilities are required for across IT vendors in terms of making a sustainable product.
So married with technology, certain kind of responsibility is built in, and the innovation which continues to grow from point A to point B possibly is an amalgamation of all three, which is what is going to take it to the next level with the help of the digital tools. Excellent. So Nishant is asking, what is the maintenance procedure for these tiles? So I think, Shneel, you would be in a better position to answer this. It's a question which relates to you. It's not properly maintained. How is it, to be renewed?
So just like the cartridges in a water filter, like I mentioned, need to be replaced from time to time. How frequently they need to be replaced? It would be a couple of months, depending on how contaminated the water is and how much water you are cleaning. But the material would begin to change its coloration from green to different colors to tell you that it's getting saturated and you have to replace it. We will, so as part of Indus, the team and the social enterprise we have now, we are identifying water stewards and training them to have a sort of an app that tells them when the material is getting saturated. So they will either the small scale artisans, we train them to replace the material by themselves, or we will have water stewards in certain cases to go in and replace it. Just the engineers that come to your house and replace these cartridges in a kitchen. And if it isn't maintained properly, the material will dry out, fall off. It's natural material; you can biodegrade it, and you can apply the fresh material on the tiles again. So the tiles can be reused. The tiles have to be reused. Yeah.
There is a question from Mani Singh. The question is, can we categorize this material in the elements of regenerative architecture? If yes, then when the layers grow on and on, will they be dense enough to create a wall kind of a structure?
So it's a very good question, actually. There is, again, a part of the research that we're doing looks at creating these different thick layers or designing these layers so that it becomes a much more structurally stable or much more organic structure. It is, yeah, you can say that it's a part of regenerative. Honestly, I'll be a bit provocative here, and I think the word regeneration is often very loosely used in policies and in supply chains. And one person whom I recently read was Navi Raju, who's written Jugaad Innovation, if everybody's read the book, and he talks about regenerative, I think, in the most apt and it's probably the last and the most difficult step in achieving a truly circular economy. And well, I would hope that this material is a part of it, yes.
Great. Rohan has a question. He is Director of Public Policy at the Scotch Group. Rohan, please go ahead.
Ms. Malik, first off, I would like to congratulate you on building a biomaterial with such diverse application. It was very impressive to see and hear your presentation. My question isn't so much about what you have created, but your vision for its applicability and scalability. You spoke about community and the projects that you're doing in Kolkata and Panipat, working with small artisans and training them to perhaps also earn a sustainable livelihood in the process. How do you envision this model to scale and grow over time?
It's a beautiful question, Rohan. Thank you so much. The fun is actually in the scaling of this system. And as we begin to implement it and as we begin to speak with these artisan workers, but also the companies for whom these artisans workers work for, we're beginning to realize that we're creating small loops at every location, and these loops are somehow intertwined with each other. So they work complementarily. So it's a distributed network that I imagine will come up, where there are walls in this decentralized systems such as Indus that not only clean polluted water, but also say look at remediation of certain soil, certain the ecology in its surrounding. There's a concept which we are developing. It's called the ecological carrying capacity of a land. And I'm very provocative in saying that if we are in Shneel's country, besides gross domestic product, which was not going to be there will be GEP, which is gross ecological product. And having some of these systems become a part of the daily activities of you and me will not just change our human behavior, but it becomes a part of, we're using the water, we need to still have our skin in the game and treat it before we dispose it or reuse it, right? If we're tilling the soil, rather than just putting fertilizers, can we find a different way of reinstigating certain crops in it? So again, it's for me, Indus is just step one, just so that the door opens for me, and then we can start building this loop of work, and which again, from circular economy, then that's bioeconomy, which is being talked about on the international scale. The biggest challenges of bioeconomy is that our industries are not fit for biomass cultivation on the scale we need. So instead of putting all the pressure into the industries that exist and asking them to invest huge amounts of money and change everything they have in terms of production, can we empower the community that is not empowered yet and use them, uplift them, and help them to leapfrog into the future and spearhead this movement further? And then the companies will keep coming.
So as we run, one last question, I'll have to, I'm constrained actually by time. If I had my way, probably I would have carried on for maybe another hour or so. It's so interesting. It's such an engrossing discussion that we are having. For an absolutely a lay person in the field where you come from, that I am, it's quite a learning from me. Mahalakshmi is asking, what is the major difference between the prototype of BIQ house, Germany, and hydrogel and BIQ as glass tubes?
Yes.
A quick one.
So the BIQ house, if, for the audience who doesn't know, is the first and probably the only building which has photobioreactors on its facade. It's constructed in Hamburg in 2013. It's nothing but along with the walls on its facade, instead of the balcony, it actually has massive liquid containers that are growing algae on it. And since then, the firms that are involved have been extracting this algae and using it for biomass to create amounts of energy and put it back into the system. The difference between these, my PhD research actually was to say that I will build BIQ house number 2, which I hopefully will before I get really old. The difference is that in the BIQ house, it's an engineering solution installed on a building facade. It's not a building design of its own, one. Second, it's using huge amounts of energy to maintain the system, right? It has to bubble the algae and it has to replace the algae. Pipes get clogged, leakage happens. But still, it's one of my favorite buildings, I have to say. I've cried sitting outside that building for days together because it's absolutely fantastic. What the hydrogel lets you do is it allows you to grow the microalgae without all that engineering thing. So imagine that entire system into the material that you can print and mold in any geometrical shape you want so that it doesn't look like an engineering container, and use it in different ways. Then now we're testing how this material can help us extract large amounts of biomass as well, just like the BIQ house does. So that's the difference.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much. And I think in the interest of time, we'll have to pull the curtains down on today's show. It was absolutely fantastic listening to you and interacting with all the participants there. And
Sharon, just a minute, can I intervene?
Yes, please go ahead.
I see. Thank you so much, Shneel. I see there are tons and tons of unanswered questions and comments. So my suggestion would be, Gursaran, do you think we can take all these questions? The users can post them on Digital Arts Forum, and maybe we can request Shneel to find some time to answer them whenever she has the time, because most of these questions are very, very relevant.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Shoot them to me. I've got a profile on the Digital Arts Forum, so please reach me out there, and I can find time to answer some of them. Sure.
All right. Thank you so much, all ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this episode. It was extremely informative, and I look forward to your continued support and participation in the future shows as well. We'll keep you posted, and as we leave you today, we extend the invitation to you. Kunalvi, can we have the announcement for the next one? Thank you, Shneel, very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It was absolutely phenomenal having interacted with you today. So coming up is our next speaker, which is going to be on the 3rd of next month, which is Kadeen James. She is a creative technologist. She's an artist, activist, digital curator, immersive XR producer, digital maker, innovator, emerging technology enthusiast, so on and so forth. I mean, it's quite a huge introduction. And she's also the CEO and founder of the Immersive Kind, a multidisciplinary platform for artists and designers. She would be on the platform. So kindly do join us. And I look forward to having you with us. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye. Waheguru.